It was one of those afternoons in Scottsdale where the sun didn't just shine. It pressed down like a hot hand on your shoulders. The air shimmered above the asphalt and even the palm trees looked tired. Two teenage brothers, 16 and 14, walked along the sidewalk near the edge of the city's luxury car district. They weren't from some gated mansion neighborhood. They lived in a quiet, tree-lined suburb where lawns were mowed on weekends and neighbors still waved from their driveways. Their house was comfortable but unassuming, deliberately so, though the boys didn't know that yet. They'd taken the bus downtown after school, just killing time before their dad picked them up for dinner. No agenda, no plan, just two curious kids with a few hours to spare and a shared fascination with cars. Not the kind you see in driveways or school parking lots, but the ones that looked like they'd been sculpted from dreams. Low-slung, gleaming, impossibly fast machines with names like Lamborghini, Bentley, and Rolls-Royce. They'd seen them in videos, in movies, even in passing on the highway, but never up close. Never where they could see the stitching on the leather seats or the way sunlight danced off the polished rims. So when they spotted the glass-fronted showroom of Lux Motors, a dealership that looked more like a museum than a place to buy a car, they stopped. Not to cause trouble, not to gawk obnoxiously, just to look, like you might pause in front of an art gallery window, wondering what it would feel like to stand inside. The older brother pushed the door open. A soft chime sounded. Cold air rushed out, thick with the scent of new leather and something faintly metallic, like polished steel and ambition. Inside, the space was quiet, almost reverent. Soft lighting highlighted each vehicle like it was on display in a gallery. A silver Tesla with custom wheels sat beside a deep blue Maserati. Near the back, under a spotlight, sat a Rolls-Royce Ghost. Ivory white, impossibly smooth, with a Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament that seemed to float above the grille. They didn't touch anything. Didn't lean on the cars. Didn't even speak above a whisper. The younger one pointed at the Rolls-Royce's Starlight headliner, a feature he'd read about online, and his brother nodded, eyes wide. They circled it slowly, taking in the details, the wood trim, the suicide doors, the way the tires looked like they'd never touched a pothole. A salesperson in a crisp navy suit watched them from behind a glass desk, but didn't approach. Maybe he assumed they were just kids killing time. Maybe he thought they'd leave on their own. For a while they did nothing wrong, just stood near the car, talking in hushed tones about horsepower and electric range and whether the seats reclined all the way back. But then, after about 10 minutes, a different man appeared, taller, broader, wearing a black polo with a small Lux Motors logo on the chest and an earpiece coiled around his neck. Security. His name tag read, Derek. He walked straight toward them, arms crossed. "You boys need to move along," he said, voice flat. The older brother blinked. "We're just looking." "This isn't a museum," Derek said. "We don't let people hang around without intent to buy." "We're not hanging around," the younger one said, voice higher than he wanted. "We're just interested." Derek's eyes flicked to their clothes, hoodies, jeans, worn sneakers. He didn't say it out loud, but his expression said everything. "You don't belong here." "Look," he said, stepping closer. "I've seen your type before. You take pictures, you post them online like you're connected, but you couldn't afford the tire on that car. Now, unless your dad's pulling up in a Maybach in the next 2 minutes, I need you out." The older brother felt his face get hot. "We didn't do anything wrong." "That's not how it works," Derek said, already turning toward the door. "Come on." He didn't grab them, not exactly, but he walked behind them like a guard, close enough that they had no choice but to move. As they stepped outside, the heat hit them like a wall. A few people on the sidewalk glanced over. One woman slowed her steps, phone already raised. Inside, the air had been cool and quiet. Outside, the world felt loud and exposed. The brothers stood on the curb, stunned. They hadn't shouted. They hadn't touched a single thing. They'd been polite, even said "excuse me" when walking past a display. But none of that mattered. What mattered, it seemed, was how they looked. A man in a pickup truck idling at the light rolled down his window. "Everything okay, guys?" The older brother forced a smile. "Yeah, just not welcome here, I guess." The man nodded slowly, then lifted his phone. He'd caught the tail end of the scene, the security guard looming, the boys stepping out with their hands in their pockets, heads slightly down. He didn't say anything else, just drove off. What neither brother knew was that the man had recorded the last 30 seconds. And by the time they got on the bus home, that clip was already spreading. It started on a local community page. Teens kicked out of luxury car dealership for just looking. Is this what customer service looks like now? Then it jumped to a regional news group. Then a national parenting forum. Within hours, it had tens of thousands of views. Comments poured in. They look like my nephews. I've been treated like that just for wearing a hoodie. Why assume they're trouble? A few defended the dealership. It's private property. They have to protect their inventory. But most people sided with the boys. Not because they were victims, but because they were ordinary kids who'd done nothing wrong. Back at home, the brothers didn't tell their dad right away. They didn't want to make a big deal out of it. They changed out of their hoodies, grabbed sodas from the fridge, and sat on the back porch, watching the desert sky turn orange. Their dad was late. He often was. He ran a company that most people had never heard of, though it powered parts of the internet millions used every day. He drove an old Honda, wore the same 3 pairs of shoes on rotation, and still packed his lunch in a paper bag. He'd sold his first company years ago for a life-changing sum, but he'd never let it change how he lived or how he raised his sons. Money doesn't make you better than anyone, he'd told them more than once. It just gives you more chances to do the right thing. When he finally pulled into the driveway that evening, he found them on the porch. He could tell something was off. Not angry, just quiet in a way that meant something had happened. What's up? He asked, sitting beside them on the steps. The older brother hesitated. We went to that fancy car place downtown. Lux Motors. And? Their dad prompted gently. They kicked us out. Why? Said we were loitering. That we didn't look like we were going to buy anything. Their dad didn't react right away. He just stared at the horizon, where the last sliver of sun was disappearing behind the hills. Did you do anything wrong? No, the younger one said quickly. We didn't even touch the cars. We were just looking. Their dad nodded slowly. Sometimes people see a hoodie and a backpack and forget there's a person underneath. He didn't say more that night. But later, after the boys were in bed, he searched online. He found the video within minutes. Watched it 3 times. Saw his sons, polite, confused, trying not to look embarrassed, as a grown man in a security uniform herded them out like they were trespassers. He didn't rage, didn't call lawyers, didn't post anything online. But something shifted in him. Not anger, disappointment. Disappointment in how easily people judge, in how quickly assumptions replace curiosity, and in the quiet belief that some places think dignity is something you have to pay for. He knew what he had to do. Not for revenge, not to show off, but because his boys deserved to know that being treated fairly wasn't a privilege, it was a right. And if a place forgot that, maybe it needed a reminder. But that would come tomorrow. For now, he turned off the lights, checked that the boys' bedroom doors were cracked open like they liked, and went to bed with a plan forming in his mind, not loud, not flashy, but firm. Like everything else he did, outside the desert night settled in, quiet and vast. Somewhere downtown, a showroom sat empty, its luxury cars gleaming under soft lights, unaware that everything was about to change. The house was quiet the next morning, the kind of quiet that only comes after something unsettling has happened. No loud music from upstairs, no arguing over who got the last Pop-Tart, no rushing around looking for lost shoes. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft clink of a spoon against a cereal bowl. The older brother sat at the kitchen table, still in his pajamas, scrolling through his phone with a frown. Overnight, the video of what happened at the dealership had blown up, not just on local pages. Now it was on national news sites, parenting blogs, even a few car forums. Comments ranged from supportive, those kids look like they were just curious, to cruel, should have known better than to go in there dressed like that. But the worst part wasn't the strangers talking about them. It was the feeling that they'd been reduced to a clip, a hoodie, a pair of sneakers, a moment of embarrassment caught on camera and turned into content. His younger brother came downstairs a few minutes later, hair messy, eyes half open. He didn't say anything at first, just poured himself a bowl of cereal and sat across from his brother, staring into it like it held answers. You see it? The older one asked. Yeah, the younger one mumbled. My science teacher sent it to the whole class group chat. Said she was proud of us for staying calm. That surprised him. She did? Yeah, said it showed maturity. He almost smiled, but then remembered how small he'd felt standing on that sidewalk. Heat on his neck, eyes down like he'd done something shameful just by existing in that space. Their dad came in a few minutes later, already dressed for the day, khakis, a plain blue shirt, no tie. He carried a travel mug of coffee and a brown paper bag with his lunch inside. He looked tired, but not in the usual late night at the office way. More like he'd been thinking hard about something. He poured himself a second cup of coffee and sat at the head of the table. For a moment, no one spoke. Then he said, "Tell me exactly what happened." They did. Not the edited version they'd given last night, but the full story, the way they'd walked in, how quiet it was, how they'd admired the Rolls-Royce from a distance, how the salesperson ignored them until the security guard showed up. They described Derek's tone, the way he stood too close, how he never asked their names or gave them a chance to explain. Their dad listened without interrupting. No sighs, no eye rolls, no "I told you so." Just quiet attention, like every word mattered. When they finished, he nodded slowly. "You didn't do anything wrong." "We know," the older brother said, but his voice cracked a little. It felt like we were invisible until we were in the way." Their dad put his mug down. "That's the worst kind of invisibility, when people only see what they expect to see." He got up and walked to the sink, rinsing his cup. Then he turned around, leaning against the counter. "I watched the video last night." Both boys looked up, surprised. "I saw how you handled yourselves. You stayed respectful. You didn't yell. You didn't argue. That takes real strength, especially when someone's treating you like you don't matter." The younger one looked down at his cereal, suddenly blinking fast. Their dad came back to the table and sat again. "I didn't raise you to need fancy cars or expensive clothes to feel worthy. But I also didn't raise you to accept being treated like you're less than someone else just because of how you look." He paused. "Places like that dealership, they sell more than cars. They sell an image. And sometimes they forget that real people don't always fit neatly into that image." The older brother finally asked the question that had been nagging him. "So what do we do?" Their dad didn't answer right away. He looked out the window at the backyard, the old swing set they'd outgrown, the lemon tree their mom had planted years ago, the patch of grass that never quite stayed green. This house, this life, it wasn't flashy, but it was theirs. Safe, honest. "I'm going to handle it," he said simply. "Like, call the manager?" The younger one asked. "Maybe. But not to complain, not to threaten, to talk." He stood up, picked up his lunch bag and keys. "You two go to school like normal. Don't let this mess with your day. And don't read every comment online. That's a trap. People will say all kinds of things, but none of it changes who you are." As he headed for the door, he turned back. "One more thing. You didn't embarrass me yesterday. You made me proud." And with that, he was gone. The brothers sat in silence for a long moment. Then the younger one pushed his bowl away. "Do you think he's going to buy that Rolls-Royce just to prove a point?" The older one laughed, a real laugh, the first since yesterday. "Nah, he'd never do that. He thinks cars like that are wasteful. Unless," the younger one grinned, "unless he buys it and donates it to the robotics club." They both laughed harder then, the tension breaking like a storm passing. At school, things were different. Not in a bad way, but in that strange, awkward way when suddenly everyone knows something personal about you. A few kids clapped the older brother on the back between classes. A girl from his math class said, "My dad owns a garage," and he said what that security guy did was totally unprofessional. Even the principal stopped him in the hallway and said, "If you ever need to talk, my door's open." It was weird. He wasn't used to being seen this way, not as the quiet kid who sat in the back, but as someone people thought had stood up to injustice. He hadn't stood up to anything. He just tried not to cry when he was being shamed for existing. At lunch, he and his brother sat with their usual group. No one made a big deal, which he appreciated. They talked about the upcoming science fair, a new video game, whether the cafeteria pizza was actually edible. It wasn't. Normal stuff. For a little while, he almost forgot about the dealership, but then his phone buzzed. A notification from a news app. Billionaire tech founder's sons kicked out of luxury dealership. What happened next? His stomach dropped. He hadn't told anyone who his dad was. No one at school knew. His dad had made sure of that, kept his name off school forms, never showed up in flashy cars for pickup, never donated under his own name to school fundraisers. He wanted his kids to be known for who they were, not what he owned. Now, thanks to some internet sleuthing, that was changing. He showed the article to his brother under the table. The headline alone made his chest tight. "Do you think Dad knows?" The younger one whispered. "Probably," he said. "He knows everything." Meanwhile, across town, their dad sat in his modest office, a converted garage behind a low-rise building with no sign out front. There were no marble floors or glass walls, just whiteboards covered in code, a few mismatched chairs, and a fridge stocked with energy drinks and sparkling water. He'd built his company from nothing, writing the first lines of code in this very room. He'd sold it years ago, but he still came here to think, to work on side projects, to stay grounded. He opened his laptop and pulled up the dealership's website. Lux Motors. Sleek design, high-end photos, promises of exclusive experiences and unmatched service. He scrolled through the staff page, found the general manager, photo, bio, LinkedIn link. Then he checked public records. The dealership was part of a larger luxury auto group, but this location was independently managed. That meant the manager had real authority and real accountability. He didn't call right away. Instead, he wrote a short email. Not angry, not dramatic, just clear. "My sons visited your showroom yesterday. They were escorted out by security for loitering. They did nothing wrong. I'd like to speak with you in person. I'll be by tomorrow morning." He signed it with his full name. He knew what would happen next. The manager would Google him. See the net worth. See the company sale. See the quiet philanthropy. Scholarships, clean water projects, tech labs in underserved schools. And then the manager would panic. But that wasn't the point. The point was this. His boys had been made to feel small in a place that should have welcomed curiosity. And if he could use his position, not to punish but to teach, then he would. He closed his laptop and walked outside. The afternoon sun was warm but not harsh. He thought about the Rolls-Royce his sons had admired. It wasn't just a car to them. It was a symbol of engineering, of beauty, of possibility. And instead of being invited to learn, they'd been told they didn't belong. That wasn't just bad business. It was a failure of basic human decency. He got in his old Honda, started the engine, it sputtered once, then caught, and drove home. On the way, he passed a community center where kids were building go-karts in a summer program. He'd funded that program anonymously. He liked seeing them work with their hands, dream with their eyes open. When he got home, the boys were already there. Backpacks dropped by the door, snacks half-eaten on the counter. "How was school?" he asked. "Fine," the older one said. "Weird, but fine." Their dad nodded. "Good, keep your heads up." This'll pass, but he knew it wouldn't, not completely. Once you've been made to feel unwelcome somewhere, that feeling sticks. Like a splinter you can't quite dig out. So he made a quiet promise to himself. He wouldn't just fix this for his sons. He'd try to fix it for the next kids who walked in wearing hoodies and carrying nothing but curiosity. That night, after dinner, he sat with them in the living room. No phones, no TV, just the three of them. "I'm going to the dealership tomorrow," he said. "Are you going to yell at them?" The younger one asked. "No," he said. "I'm going to ask them to do better." "How?" "I'm going to offer them a chance to turn this into something good. If they're willing." He didn't give details. Didn't need to. They knew him well enough to trust that he wouldn't make a scene. That he'd act with purpose, not pride. Later, as he tucked the younger one into bed, something he still did, even though the boy was nearly as tall as him now, he said, "You know why I drive that old car, right?" "Because you're cheap?" The boy joked. "Because it works," his dad said softly. "And because what matters isn't what you drive. It's where you're going and who you take with you." The boy smiled. "I like our car." "Me too." Upstairs, the older brother was already asleep, phone dark on his nightstand. For the first time since yesterday, he looked peaceful. Their dad stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the quiet sounds of his house, the AC humming, a dog barking far away, the wind rustling the palm trees outside. He felt a deep, steady calm, not because he had money or power, but because he knew who he was, and he was raising his sons to know the same. Tomorrow would be hard. There would be awkward conversations, maybe defensiveness, maybe excuses, but he wasn't going there to win. He was going there to remind them and himself that respect isn't earned by what's in your wallet. It's given because someone is human, and that's something no luxury car can buy. The morning sun hit the dealership's glass front like a spotlight, turning the showroom into a glittering box of dreams. Chrome gleamed, leather seats glowed under soft lights, and every car looked like it had just rolled off a movie set. Outside, the parking lot was already filling up. Salespeople in sharp suits, customers in sunglasses stepping out of rented SUVs, a valet polishing a Ferrari with a cloth that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Inside the manager's office, tucked behind the main floor, tension hung in the air like static. The general manager, let's call him Mr. Reynolds, had barely slept. He'd spent half the night reading articles, watching the video, scrolling through comments that called his dealership elitist, racist, and out of touch. He'd even gotten a call from corporate asking if this was going to blow up their brand. And then there was the email short calm, signed with a name he recognized instantly, a name that showed up on lists like top tech, visionaries, and most generous philanthropists. Man who'd walked away from billions but still quietly shaped the digital world. And now that man's sons had been kicked out of his showroom. Mr. Reynolds had replayed the security footage a dozen times. He saw the boys, polite, hands in pockets, eyes wide with wonder, not suspicion. He saw Derek, his head of security, looming over them like they were shoplifters. He saw the moment they stepped outside, shoulders slumped, as if they'd been scolded for breathing too loud. He'd already spoken to Derek. The man had defended himself. They looked like they didn't belong. We get kids in here all the time trying to take selfies for clout. I was protecting the inventory. But they didn't touch anything, Mr. Reynolds had said, voice tight. They didn't even ask a question. Still, Derek had shrugged. You can't be too careful. Now sitting at his desk, coffee gone cold, Mr. Reynolds wondered if careful had turned into cruel. He'd built this dealership on reputation, on making people feel special, seen, valued. But yesterday, 2 kids had left feeling like intruders in a world they were only curious about. His assistant buzzed him. Sir, there's a man here to see you. Says his name is Daniel Carter. Mr. Reynolds' stomach dropped. He's early. Show him in, he said, smoothing his tie, standing up, then sitting back down. He didn't want to seem too eager, but he also didn't want to seem dismissive. It was a tightrope. The door opened. The man who walked in wasn't what Mr. Reynolds expected. No designer suit, no gold watch, just a simple button-down shirt, dark jeans, and worn leather shoes. He carried no briefcase, no entourage, just a calm presence that filled the room without demanding attention. Mr. Carter, Mr. Reynolds said, rising quickly this time. Thank you for coming. Thanks for seeing me, the man replied. His voice was quiet, steady. He didn't offer a handshake right away, just stood there looking around the office like he was taking it all in. Mr. Reynolds gestured to a chair. Please sit, the man sat, crossed his legs, placed his hands on his knees, didn't fidget, didn't glance at his phone, just looked Mr. Reynolds in the eye. I'm not here to cause trouble, he began. I'm here because my sons left your showroom yesterday feeling like they'd done something wrong just by walking in. Mr. Reynolds swallowed. I've reviewed the footage, and I've spoken to my security team. I want you to know we're taking this very seriously. Good, the man said. But seriousness isn't enough. What matters is what you do next. There was no anger in his voice, no threat. Just clarity, like he was stating a fact, not making an accusation. Mr. Reynolds leaned forward. We pride ourselves on customer service. What happened? It wasn't our standard. Then what is your standard? The man asked gently. Is it only for people who look like they can afford a $300,000 car? Or is it for anyone who walks through that door with genuine interest? Mr. Reynolds hesitated. We have to protect our assets. These cars aren't just vehicles, they're investments. I get that, the man said. But curiosity isn't theft. Wonder isn't a crime. My boys weren't trying to steal anything. They were trying to learn. And instead of being welcomed, they were treated like suspects. He paused. I didn't raise them to expect special treatment. But I did raise them to expect basic respect. Mr. Reynolds felt the weight of those words. He thought about his own kids, how he'd want them treated if they walked into a place full of things they couldn't afford but wanted to understand. You're right, he said quietly. We failed them. The man nodded. Okay, so now the question is, what do you do with that failure? Mr. Reynolds blinked. What do you mean? Do you sweep it under the rug? Issue a half-hearted apology? Or do you use it to build something better? The man leaned forward slightly. I have an idea, and I'd like to offer it to you, not as a demand, but as a partnership. Mr. Reynolds sat up straighter. I'm listening. Your dealership sits in one of the richest car districts in the state, but just 10 miles from here, there are high schools where kids have never seen the inside of a luxury car, let alone learned how one works. What if, once a month, you opened your doors not just to buyers, but to learners, to students interested in engineering, design, sustainability, even sales? Mr. Reynolds frowned slightly. You mean, like a tour? More than that, the man said. A hands-on experience. Let them sit in the cars, ask questions, talk to your mechanics and designers. Show them how electric motors work, how AI is changing the industry, how a car goes from sketch to showroom. Call it Youth Innovation Day. I'll fund it. All of it. Staff, materials, transportation for the kids. You just provide the space and your team's time. Mr. Reynolds was stunned. He'd expected a lawsuit, a public shaming, maybe a demand for free cars. Instead, this man was offering to turn a moment of shame into an opportunity for his business and for the community. And in return? He asked cautiously. In return, the man said, you commit to training your staff on unconscious bias, not as a punishment but as a practice. Teach them to see people, not assumptions, and revise your guest policy so that curiosity is never mistaken for threat. He paused. This isn't about me. It's about making sure the next kid who walks in wearing a hoodie doesn't get turned away before they even get to ask a question. Mr. Reynolds looked down at his desk. He thought about the viral video, the angry comments, the fear that his dealership would be labeled forever as that place that kicked out those kids. But this was a way out. Not just damage control, but real growth. I'd be honored to do that, he said, meeting the man's eyes again. We'll make it happen. The man finally smiled, a small, warm thing. Good, then he stood. One more thing. Mr. Reynolds stood too. Yes? I'd like to see that Rolls-Royce my sons were looking at. Mr. Reynolds led him out of the office and onto the showroom floor. The Rolls-Royce Ghost sat exactly where it had yesterday, pristine, majestic, almost glowing under the lights. The man walked up to it slowly. Ran a hand along the hood, not possessively, but with appreciation. Beautiful machine, he murmured. Then he turned to Mr. Reynolds. I'll take it. Mr. Reynolds' eyes widened. You want to buy it? Yes, the man said. But not for me. I want you to help me donate it to the city's STEM education program. Let students take it apart, study it, rebuild it, turn it into a teaching tool. Mr. Reynolds was speechless. That's incredibly generous. It's not generosity, the man said. It's investment. In kids who might one day design cars better than this one. He pulled out his wallet, not a fancy one, just a worn leather fold, and handed over a business card. No title, no logo, just a name and a phone number. If you're serious about this partnership, he said, call me next week. We'll plan the first event together. Then he turned and walked out the same way he'd come in, quietly. Without fanfare, without looking back. Mr. Reynolds stood there for a long moment, staring at the card in his hand. He felt something he hadn't felt in years, hope. Not the kind that comes from a big sale, but the kind that comes from doing something right. He called Derek over. We're changing how we do things, he said. Starting today? Derek looked confused. What do you mean? No more assumptions. No more they don't belong here based on how someone dresses. From now on, every person who walks through that door gets the benefit of the doubt, until they prove otherwise. Derek opened his mouth to argue. But Mr. Reynolds held up a hand. And you're going to sit in on the first bias training session, not as punishment, as a leader. Derek nodded slowly, chastened but not defiant. Maybe he was starting to understand. Back in the showroom, a young couple walked in, holding hands, looking nervous. They wore simple clothes, carried a baby in a carrier. Mr. Reynolds walked over himself. Welcome, he said warmly. Looking for something special? The woman smiled shyly. Just browsing. We're saving up for our first new car. Well, take your time, he said. Ask any question you want. No pressure, just enjoy the experience. As he walked away, he glanced at the spot where the two boys had stood yesterday. He made a silent promise. Never again. Meanwhile, across town, the man who'd just changed everything got back into his old Honda. He didn't call his sons right away. He just drove, windows down, letting the desert air rush in. He thought about the look on Mr. Reynolds' face, not fear but realization. That was what he'd hoped for. Not humiliation. Awakening. When he got home, he found his boys in the garage, tinkering with an old go-kart engine they'd rescued from a neighbor's trash. "Hey," he said, leaning against the doorframe. They looked up, grease on their hands, smiles on their faces. "How'd it go?" the older one asked. "Better than I hoped," he said. He didn't give details. Didn't need to. They could see it in his eyes. The quiet satisfaction of someone who'd turned a wrong into a chance to do right. Later that night, over dinner, the younger one asked, "Do you think they'll really let kids come in and touch the cars?" "I think they will," his dad said. "And maybe one of those kids will build a car that changes the world." The older brother grinned. "Maybe it'll be us." His dad raised his glass of water. "To curiosity," he said. "To respect," the younger one added. They clinked glasses, and somewhere, in a gleaming showroom under soft lights, a Rolls-Royce waited, not for a billionaire to drive it, but for a classroom of kids to learn from it. The first Youth Innovation Day arrived on a Saturday morning that smelled like rain. Rare for Scottsdale, but the air felt charged, alive. By 8 a.m., a line of yellow school buses idled in the Lux Motors parking lot, their doors open, steps down, waiting. Kids spilled out in groups, some in hoodies, some in t-shirts with school logos, a few in clothes clearly borrowed for the occasion. They carried notebooks, backpacks, and wide-eyed excitement that couldn't be faked. Inside the dealership, everything had changed. Gone were the "Do Not Touch" signs. In their place hung banners that read "Ask Questions," "Curiosity, Welcome Here," and "Future Engineers Start Somewhere." The usual sales staff wore name tags that now included their role, not just sales consultant, but EV specialist, design mentor, tech guide. Even Derek, the security guard from the incident, stood near the entrance in a clean polo, holding a clipboard with a list of student names. He looked nervous, but also different. Less like a gatekeeper, more like a host. Mr. Reynolds moved through the space like a conductor before a symphony. He'd spent the past 2 weeks retraining his team, redesigning the layout and working closely with the quiet man who'd walked in weeks ago. That man hadn't taken over. He'd simply offered support, ideas, and trust. And that trust had sparked something unexpected. Pride. Not the kind that came from selling expensive cars, but the kind that came from opening doors. At 8:30 a.m., the first group of students entered. They were from a public high school 10 miles away, one with outdated science labs and a robotics team that built robots out of old soda bottles and spare parts. Their teacher, a woman with kind eyes and a voice that carried calm authority, walked with them, her own eyes scanning the room in quiet awe. "Welcome," Mr. Reynolds said, stepping forward. "We're so glad you're here." A boy in the front raised his hand. "Are we really allowed to sit in the cars?" "You're not just allowed," Mr. Reynolds said with a smile. "You're encouraged." Laughter rippled through the group. Then, slowly at first, they began to explore. At the Tesla station, an engineer from the service bay showed them how regenerative braking worked, using a small model with magnets and copper wire. At the Bentley display, a designer explained how wood veneers were hand-selected and polished for weeks. Near the back, where the Rolls-Royce now sat on a low platform with protective mats around it, a sign read, "This car is yours to learn from. Please respect it like a teacher." The boys, the ones who'd been turned away weeks ago, stood near the entrance watching. They hadn't been asked to come, but their dad had gently suggested it. "You helped start this," he'd said. "You should see it grow." They didn't wear hoodies today, not because they were ashamed of them, but because they wanted to look like they belonged, not as victims, but as part of something new. A girl about the younger brother's age approached them, eyes fixed on the Rolls-Royce. "Is that the one they kicked you out for looking at?" she asked quietly. The older brother nodded. "Yeah," she frowned. "That's messed up." "It was," he said. "But look what happened instead." She followed his gaze. Kids leaning into engine compartments with flashlights, asking questions, taking notes. A boy with braces was explaining battery chemistry to a salesperson who was actually listening. A girl in a hijab was sketching the car's silhouette in a notebook, her pencil moving fast. "It's like they're seeing us," the girl said. "Yeah," the younger brother said, "for the first time." Meanwhile, in a small conference room off the main floor, Mr. Reynolds sat with the man who'd started it all. They weren't in suits. They were in jeans and coffee-stained shirts, papers spread across the table, feedback forms, attendance sheets, photos from the morning. "I didn't expect this many kids to show up," Mr. Reynolds admitted. "We had to turn away 2 schools. We'll need more space next time." The man nodded. "Then let's plan for it. Maybe partner with the community college. Use their engineering labs for deeper sessions." He paused, then added, "You didn't have to do this, you know. You could have just issued an apology and moved on." Mr. Reynolds looked down at his hands. "I thought about it. But then I watched the video again. Your sons walking out like they'd been scolded for dreaming. And I realized, we weren't just selling cars, we were guarding a gate. And that's not what this place should be." The man smiled. "Gates are meant to open." Outside, Derek approached the 2 brothers. He cleared his throat. "Hey," he said, voice rough but sincere. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how I acted. I made an assumption and it was wrong." The older brother studied him for a moment. He could have said something sharp, something that would make the man squirm. But he remembered what his dad always said. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. "It's okay," he said. "Just don't do it to anyone else." Derek nodded. "I won't." Then, surprising everyone, including himself, he turned to a group of students who looked lost near the Maserati display. "You guys want to see how the suspension system works? I can show you." They lit up. "Really?" "Yeah," he said, leading them over. "It's actually pretty cool." Back inside the conference room, the man checked his watch. "I should get going. I promised the boys we'd grab lunch after." Mr. Reynolds stood. "Before you go, thank you. Not just for the funding, but for believing we could be better." The man shook his hand. "You did the hard part. You chose to change." As he walked out, he passed a station where his younger son was now helping a group of middle schoolers understand how electric motors spin without gasoline. The boy's hands moved with confidence, his voice steady. He wasn't the kid who'd been shamed on a sidewalk anymore. He was a guide. A teacher. His dad watched for a moment, pride swelling quiet and deep in his chest. Then he slipped out the back door unnoticed. Over the next few weeks, stories began to spread, not just online but in classrooms, at dinner tables, in community meetings. A student who'd never considered engineering wrote a college essay about the day he held a carbon fiber car panel in his hands and realized he wanted to design things that lasted. A girl who'd been told she wasn't cut out for tech asked her school to start an auto club, and they did, with donated tools and a retired mechanic as advisor. Even local news covered the event, not as a redemption arc for a billionaire, but as a quiet revolution in customer service and community trust. Lux Motors saw something unexpected too. More foot traffic. Not just from wealthy buyers, but from families who'd heard about the program and wanted to see a business that actually cared. Sales didn't skyrocket overnight, but something more valuable grew. Reputation. People started saying, "That's the place that treats everyone like they matter." Mr. Reynolds made Youth Innovation Day permanent, once a month, rain or shine. He hired a part-time coordinator from the local university's education department. He even convinced corporate to adopt the model at other locations. "If it works here," he told them, "it can work anywhere." And the Rolls-Royce? It stayed. Not as a display piece, but as a learning lab. Students measured its weight distribution, studied its sound insulation, even took apart a door panel, under supervision, to see how the hinges worked. Teachers used it in physics lessons. Art students sketched its curves. It became less of a luxury item and more of a classroom. One afternoon, the older brother returned on his own. He didn't tell anyone, just walked in during a quiet hour, when the showroom was empty except for a mechanic polishing a Porsche. He stood in front of the Rolls-Royce again. This time there was no guard, no judgment, just space, respect. He reached out and gently touched the hood. Cool, smooth, real. Beautiful, isn't it? A voice said. He turned. It was Mr. Reynolds. "Yeah," the boy said. "It really is." "You know," Mr. Reynolds said, "we've had kids in here who've never been inside a new car before. And now they're talking about internships, college degrees, careers. All because someone said, 'Come on in.'" "Take a look?" The boy nodded. My dad always says the best things in life aren't owned, they're shared. Mr. Reynolds smiled. He's a wise man. He's just human, the boy said, like all of us. As he left the dealership that day, he didn't feel small. He didn't feel out of place. He felt like he belonged, not because of what his family had, but because of what they'd helped create. A place where curiosity was honored, not questioned, and that, he realized, was worth more than any car on the floor. Months passed, and the story that had started with two boys being turned away from a car dealership didn't fade like most internet moments do. It didn't vanish into the noise of the next viral clip or get buried under trending hashtags. Instead, it settled into the community like good soil, quiet, nourishing, and full of things beginning to grow. The dealership wasn't the same place anymore. Not just because of the monthly youth innovation days, though those kept happening. Now with waiting lists and kids coming from 3 different school districts. It was the little things that changed. The way a salesperson would kneel to talk to a child who pointed at a tire. The way Derek, once known for his stern glare, now greeted every visitor with a nod and a, "Let me know if you've got questions." Even the lighting felt softer, less like a showroom and more like a space meant to be shared. But the real change wasn't in the building. It was in the people. One Saturday morning, nearly 6 months after that first incident, the older brother stood at the front of the showroom, holding a microphone. He wasn't nervous, not like he'd been the first time he'd spoken publicly at a school assembly. This felt different. This felt like home. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice clear and calm. "Most of you know why we're here today. But for those who don't, this program started because 2 kids walked into a place they thought was full of wonder, and were told they didn't belong." He paused, scanning the crowd. Parents, teachers, students, even a few local reporters, and there near the back, leaning against a pillar with his arms crossed and a small smile, was his dad. "We didn't come here to shame anyone," the boy continued. "We came here to show that when you give people a chance, really give them one, amazing things happen." He stepped aside, and a girl from the robotics team took the mic. She talked about how taking apart the Rolls-Royce's door panel helped her understand torque and leverage better than any textbook. Then a boy who'd never spoken in class before shared how he'd built a miniature electric motor for his science fair project after seeing the Tesla's battery system up close. After the speeches, the floor opened up. Kids wandered freely, asking questions, touching dashboards, sitting in driver's seats with permission, and sometimes with a technician right beside them, explaining how everything worked. One little boy no older than 10 sat in the Rolls-Royce with his eyes wide, whispering, "This is like a spaceship." His mom stood nearby, tears in her eyes. Later, she found Mr. Reynolds. "No one's ever let him sit in a car like this," she said. "He's got autism. Most places treat him like he's going to break something, but here, he's just a kid who loves machines." Mr. Reynolds didn't say much. He just nodded and handed her a brochure for the next event. "He's always welcome," he said. Meanwhile, the younger brother was at the EV station helping a group of middle schoolers test small battery-powered toy cars on a track. He'd gotten so good at explaining voltage and resistance that the dealership had asked him to co-lead the session. He wasn't paid, just given a t-shirt and lunch, but he didn't care. This was better than money. This was purpose. His dad watched from a distance, sipping coffee from a paper cup. He didn't interfere, didn't hover, just let his sons be who they were becoming. Confident, kind, grounded. Later that afternoon, as the crowd thinned and cleanup began, the man walked over to Mr. Reynolds, who was folding chairs with the help of 2 students. "You've built something special here," he said. Mr. Reynolds wiped his brow. "We're just getting started. Next month, we're adding a session on sustainable materials, how car makers are using recycled ocean plastic for interiors." "The kids are already asking about it," the man smiled. "You know, I didn't come here to fix your business. I came because my sons mattered to me. And you trusted us enough to let us fix it ourselves," Mr. Reynolds said. That meant more than any donation. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the last bus pull away, its windows full of waving hands and smiling faces. Back at home that evening, the family sat on the porch again, just like they had the night after the incident, but everything felt lighter now. The air smelled like blooming jasmine, and the sky was streaked with pink and gold. The younger brother kicked off his shoes and leaned back in his chair. Today felt normal, in a good way. Yeah, the older one said. Like we weren't the kids from the video anymore. We were just us. Their dad didn't say anything right away. He just watched the horizon, where the sun was dipping behind the hills. Then he said, "That's how it's supposed to be. People shouldn't be defined by their worst moment, or their most viral one." He turned to them. "I'm proud of you both, not because you stood in front of a crowd today, but because you chose to turn something painful into something helpful." The younger brother grinned. "Does this mean we can finally get a new car?" Their dad laughed. "Not a chance. That Honda's got another 100,000 miles in her." They all chuckled. It was their inside joke. The billionaire who drove a 15-year-old sedan because it still works. But the truth was deeper than that. He drove it because it reminded him and them that value isn't in what you own, but in what you do with what you have. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects kept spreading. A teacher from a rural school district reached out to Lux Motors, asking if they could bring students 2 hours away. Mr. Reynolds said yes and arranged for a shuttle. A local tech company inspired by the program started its own open lab days for high schoolers. Even the city council took notice, awarding the dealership a community partnership grant to expand the initiative. But the most surprising change happened online. The original video, the one that showed the boys being escorted out, was still up. But now the top comment wasn't angry or defensive. It was from a student who'd attended the first Youth Innovation Day. "I was scared to go in because I thought they'd treat me like I didn't belong. But they asked me what I wanted to learn. That changed everything." People started sharing their own stories, times they'd been judged by their clothes, their age, their background. And slowly the conversation shifted from blame to hope. The man never gave interviews, never posted about it on social media. He believed real change happened quietly, in rooms and hallways and showrooms where people chose kindness over assumption. He didn't need credit. He just wanted the lesson to stick. One evening, while cleaning out the garage, the older brother found an old notebook of his dad's from years ago, back when he was building his first company. On the inside cover, written in faded ink, were 3 words: "Build with heart." He showed it to his brother. "That's why he did all this, isn't it?" "Yeah," the younger one said. "He didn't want us to think the world was cold. He wanted us to help warm it up." A year after the incident, the dealership hosted its first graduate showcase. Students who'd been part of the program since the beginning presented projects they'd built: solar-powered model cars, apps that calculated a vehicle's carbon footprint, even a prototype for a wheelchair-accessible sports car. The 2 brothers stood side by side near the entrance, not as guests of honor, but as part of the team. They helped set up tables, tested microphones, made sure every kid had water and a place to stand. Their dad arrived late, as usual. He parked his Honda in the back, walked in through the service entrance, and found a spot near the wall. No one noticed him at first, and that's how he liked it. But then, during the closing remarks, Mr. Reynolds did something unexpected. He stepped to the mic and said, "A year ago, we made a mistake. We let fear override curiosity. But instead of walking away, someone gave us a second chance. And because of that, dozens of kids have discovered passions they never knew they had." He looked toward the back of the room. "So today I want to thank the person who reminded us that dignity isn't for sale, it's for everyone." All eyes turned. The man froze for a second, then gave a small, humble wave. The room erupted in applause, not for his wealth, but for his choice. Afterward, as people milled about, a little girl tugged on his sleeve. She couldn't have been more than 8. "Are you the dad?" she asked. He knelt down. "Yeah, I am. My brother says you bought that big white car so we could learn from it." "I did," he said. "Because I believe you're going to build something even better one day." She beamed. "I'm going to make a car that flies." "I hope you do," he said, standing up. "And when you do, I'll be first in line to see it." As he walked out that night, the desert air cool against his skin, he thought about how small acts, like letting 2 boys look at a car, could echo in ways no one expected. He hadn't set out to change an industry or make headlines. He just wanted his sons to know they mattered, and in doing that, he'd reminded a whole community that everyone does. The end wasn't a grand finale. It was a quiet continuation. Kids learning, adults listening, doors staying open. No villains, no heroes. Just humans choosing to do better, and sometimes that's enough.